I was thinking of how I wanted to start this episode. I decided I wanted to start it with Droopy McCool's Chidinkaloo flute. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's the kind of quality
I'm 21 years old. I am 21 years old.
I bought it when I was 19, so it's okay.
Yeah, all 2,000 of
all make
our
mistakes
10
as
Cloverfield
teenagers.
Lane viewers have just left. We chased them all away.
All right, fellow basement dwellers.
Well, that was the infamous Jedi Rocks, viewed in the special edition of today's film, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. I am joined, as always, by Zach Garrigus and Mitchell Bardsley. Good to see you both.
Hi.
I'm excited to talk about special and non-special, and perhaps more special for being non-special, things about this thing, and parsing whether it is good or not, and whether it's okay to enjoy it. Let's open with general thoughts, I suppose. Ratings out of 5. What did you all make of it?
Well, I can go ahead and jump in here.
Go ahead.
Considering my voice is a lot better than it was last time.
Maybe not your words.
Maybe not. We'll see. So I feel like I've said this every time we've talked about Star Wars, but I've gone on record as saying that I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan. But of the Star Wars properties, I am the biggest fan of the original trilogy. And as a kid, I always remember liking... going back and forth between liking this one and Empire the most. Now, at various points, I would say that I liked Empire the most because I thought that there were more stakes, or because the bad guys got to win, and that made it a little more interesting. But I also liked this one because of sort of the finality of it, and because I liked rescuing Han from Jabba and whatnot. But watching this now, having rewatched the previous two seasons, and also with maybe a little bit more of a seasoned mind as a filmmaker and film viewer, something feels kind of off in this one that I do think makes it the weakest of the original trilogy. Whether you like A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back or not, and I personally am sort of unimpressed with A New Hope, there is sort of a creativity and a real energy and almost like a, dare I say, magic to those two that's really, really grips you as a viewer, and that really doesn't feel like it's in this one. Return of the Jedi, I think, in a lot of ways feels almost like when a big popular movie or a big popular series gets handed to a totally new creative team, and they have like really different priorities and ideas, but they're trying to make it feel like those previous two so they can keep the fans on board, but they also aren't totally interested in just doing all of the same things. So you end up with a weird mix of ideas and tones that don't really gel. You've got our cute little teddy bears, but we're also trying to end the series and bring down the Empire. And a lot of these priorities and ideas just don't really mix all that well, and it feels kind of off. So 3 out of 5 from me. There are definitely things that I like in it, but I do think it's probably the most muddled and the least effective of the original Star Wars movies.
Yeah, I guess. That's all right. That's fine. That's okay. So I'm the biggest fan of Ewoks on planet Earth. Ewoks are the greatest thing to ever happen. They're probably better than the sequels for me. Collectively.
Okay.
All of the sequels. And everything after, actually. That's it. 4 out of 5. No. I think that the major criticism of Return of the Jedi is pretty much what Zach mentioned, is the fact that the stakes don't feel as high. There's things that just feel overtly and overly silly, and that detracts from any kind of emotion that you might feel from the main story, and kind of like everything leading, like building up from the past two movies. And I guess I can kind of see that for the most part, but I mean, I just feel like it's really that world building that we were kind of talking about in A New Hope that George Lucas kind of set a precedent for, that just makes a lot of the scenes that are like so well contained but serve a greater purpose. And I feel like that structure is pretty consistent in this. And I feel like a lot of like each individual scene just has its own progression and has its own impact on the story as a whole that you don't really see in a lot of sci-fi movies in general. Especially today, you do not see them at all, basically, at this point. But like Christian mentioned in his Letterboxd review, like that, the whole Jabba's palace scene, that whole intro thing, it doesn't feel like a different movie to me. It still feels like we're still leading up to that grandiose ending. We're still leading up to figuring out how the arcs are going to end. And I feel like that motivation is really powerful. And I feel like that's really the driving force behind this movie that makes me less inclined to criticize the weird, like, zany, silly stuff. And especially with the special edition. But yeah, but anyway, I really don't think I think there's like very few select scenes, like my dad was mentioning, like when one of the Ewoks dies and the other one it's like Vietnam, like freaking Forrest Gump, and he's like trying to wake him up and you realize he's dead.
It's so sad.
And that happens while these greater stakes are happening and everything. But it's really, for me, like the hardest thing is knowing what comes after Return of the Jedi from Disney is really like the hardest thing to grapple with, because you don't really know what the purpose, like the overall overarching purpose is for all this silly stuff. Like, what is it really going to amount to in later films? How is that going to play out in the prequels once those come out, kind of thing? And like, not very well sometimes, in my opinion. And like Zach kind of mentioned in his review, it kind of leads to a quote unquote downfall in a way. I don't know if I would, say that like it's really that dramatic, but I do think there's a lot of elements that Return of the Jedi presents that are mishandled later, I'll say. But the overarching narrative is so powerful. The relationship between Luke and Vader and Palpatine is so, like, talked about a lot. Like, it's really been hyped up. It's been something that everyone, like historically and just you watching the first two movies have been looking forward to. It's such, like, it's not just the fact that it's iconic, but it's just, like, it really is like a Shakespearean kind of space opera, and everything is all has to do with the characters. They all have their own score, and they all have their own like special locations where they're from, and all the things. Like, everything is all representative of each other, and everything just feels very like extremely set up to the point where all the drama feels like it's going to be worth something. And it maybe a lot of it is stylistic and less like actually like well thought out. It's like Luke is like, I want to turn my dad good, and if you kind of explain that to someone that hasn't seen Star Wars, it sounds absolutely ridiculous and completely dumb. But just the presentation is just second to none. Like, there's really nothing like it. This feels unique to me, and there's a lot of things in Return of the Jedi that are particularly well presented, especially having to do with Endor, and just there's always going to be a movie poster of every planet they're on, and the sequels don't capture that for me almost at all with a lot of the planets for me compared to a lot of the original planets. And Return of the Jedi is just another example of that for me. And I do think the forest moon of Endor is like one of my favorite planets. Planets, quote unquote. I just said a moon is a planet. Wow. But anyway, 4 out of 5 for me. That 1 star is definitely having to do with that silliness and the messiness of the actual plot. Is way more noticeable here than the last 2 films. But it wraps up so well. It's so easy for me to forgive.
Yeah. I'm hoping everything congeals in my mind. I just don't know where to start. I don't really know how to feel about this movie. I feel like I sort of have 2 separate spaces in my mind for Star Wars. The one where it's very exclusively me as like a fan of Star Wars, and then me as a cinephile. I feel like I'm allowed to say that at this point. And I really struggle with a lot of this. I think from a critical standpoint, this is one of the weaker Star Wars movies, not just in terms of the original trilogy, but overall. And, unlike my co-host here, this is coming from someone that really loves all of the films for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just something about Return that feels just not quite there. I really love the Jabba sequence. I think there's such an impeccable sense of there's great set building there, especially when they're still in his palace. I talked in my Letterboxd review about the musical cue that John Williams gives right before the Pit of Carcoon battle sort of erupts, and it's just one of those moments where you totally latch into it. And there are a couple others like that. John Williams, thematically, he's got this nice theme for the Emperor going, and plenty of good music for the Ewoks. But there's this big middle section where it's a lot of characters talking. After we get this great intro with Jabba, Luke goes and talks to Yoda for a while, and we hear a lot of stuff we already knew. And then he goes and talks to Obi-Wan about all of that same stuff. And Obi-Wan says it's all about having a certain point of view. And I guess I don't have a huge problem with that, but just from a rewatch standpoint, I think Return of the Jedi has one of the lowest rewatch values of all of the films, if we're viewing it holistically.
Yeah.
But I totally echo what Mitchell said about the ending with the Emperor and Vader. And we see these seams in Vader. He says, "It's too late for me, my son." But at that point, he's already acknowledging that Luke is his son, even though he's saying Anakin is no longer a part of him. And that is done very poetically, I think. But then they're like, Harrison Ford can't even, like, he's practically openly laughing in one, like the first scene when the Ewoks surround them. And then it's just kind of like, oh, I love the Ewoks too. And it's probably a byproduct of me having seen this first when I was a child, but like I can acknowledge that, okay, this is,
kind of a meme. Yeah.
And then when the big Endor battle finally happens, like, I mean, they're literally like, they're just like poking the sticks at the stormtroopers, and they're like falling down, and it's like, geez, like where did the like grandiose feel of like Bespin go? It's just. So I give this a 4, mostly because I love Star Wars, because John Williams is here, because ILM is here, because that ending is here. But I basically agree with all of Zach's complaints, at least to some capacity. I really do see the seams here, and it's different from the charming roughness, like I said in my review, that is evident in 4 and 5. And the special edition, oof. Before we get into that, I wanted to get into the differences in directors and writers in these installments. We know the first film, A New Hope, was written and directed by George Lucas. We know Empire was directed by Irvin Kershner and written. All of these stories are ostensibly written by George Lucas, but the screenplay for Empire was written by Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan, and Return of the Jedi is again written by Kasdan and Lucas, and directed by Richard Marquand. I think there's a sense here that Return of the Jedi is mostly George's film. I wanted to ask you guys, what did you make of the direction, both in visual choices and just an overarching sense? And I'm so tempted to read this long sequence I shared with you two over text of Kasdan and Lucas arguing about the idea of killing characters. George Lucas says, "I don't want to kill Yoda. You don't have to kill people. You're a product of the 1980s. You don't go around killing people. It's not nice." And Kasdan insists that he's trying to give the story some edge, and George is like, "I hate when characters die. When I was a kid, that just made me sad." And there's a clear give and take here. So I wanted to ask you guys more broadly, what did you make of the writing and the directorial changes in each of these installments? What do you think of Richard Marquand's visual choices? And was it an upgrade or a downgrade from Empire and A New Hope?
Well, I do think, I commented when we talked about Empire that it was probably visually my favorite, because Irvin Kershner, as a director, and it's been said that this is literally what happened, he as a director shot only what he needed so that when it came time to put the film together in the edit, it was his movie. George couldn't go in and mix and push things around like he had done to him on the first movie to make it a better movie. But in the case of Empire, in order to make it more his movie than Kershner's movie. And I think in the case of Return of the Jedi, I think perhaps George was kind of burned by that and deliberately went for a director that maybe he could push around a little bit more. I mean, there's stories of a lot of names who were approached to direct this movie. David Lynch was asked to direct. he said no, but then went on to direct Dune, which isn't a lot better. And
is it better, Zach? Is it better at all?
Well, we might talk about that next season.
Okay.
And David Cronenberg was approached, and he was called on the phone, and the first thing he said was, well, I usually write my own material, and then they hang up. So I think there's definitely an idea here that George wanted a lot more control, even if it was through somebody else, because he said that he doesn't think of himself as a great director, I don't think. And I do think that Richard Marquand is making choices here, and I do think he's being a director. It's not a case where he's asleep and basically just a name so George can do whatever he wants to do. I mean, this does look and feel like a different movie to A New Hope. In particular, I think that Richard Marquand has a better idea of how to make use of camera movement than George Lucas does. But I think that maybe the most noticeable impact here is in Lucas and Kasdan fighting over script for the film, which is definitely, I think, where the most give and take and back and forth is located in the script that just can't decide what it wants to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the control from George Lucas is definitely here, and him being a control freak with how his freaking universe wants to go is pretty obvious here. And I think it ultimately had a positive effect on this film in particular. I think Marquand kind of coming out of nowhere and being like at this point, when the movie's already come out, there's already tons of fans, and that makes like all the difference, right? And Marquand himself is probably like a huge fan of everything, and he sees all these kids going to the store and all these toys and all these kid-oriented things, and seeing what the primary audience of Star Wars is, and to him, he probably saw like just all these kids getting excited, and I feel like that just like was cemented in his brain that he has to like romanticize the ending of the trilogy. He has to keep not everything necessarily safe, but just keep everything upbeat. Keep things like you know that the evil is there, but you know it's going to be destroyed, and you want to see how the good's going to win. And that's just like an age-old tactic, and it totally works in my opinion here. And I think that's kind of like the greatest strength. And I guess the greatest weakness would be the fact that there's a lot of like a childlike wonder focus, like a tone that you want to get when it comes to the dramatic characters and like all the terrible things that have happened up to this point and what's led them to these decisions they have to make at the very end, and kind of the how the action sequences are padded. And that can start to be troublesome fairly quickly. And I think having the absence of like multiple stormtroopers like coming out of everywhere and shooting, and there's a lot of blaster fire back and forth for a long time in these tight corners and everything, versus having this gigantic forest with all these tiny willow creatures, Viet Cong coming out of the trees, and just I think there's the uniqueness of it, and how the comedy is somewhat, in my opinion, it's pretty well paced considering what else is going on, like with the Emperor and everything. And I don't think it's terribly intrusive, but I do think its inclusion and having that childlike wonder focus can definitely be somewhat of a hindrance, and it's pretty unavoidable, especially considering the stakes and the other like the previous movies and how detrimental things were in Empire Strikes Back. So
yeah, George Lucas is definitely the executive producer that is there on set every day and answers all of the questions that Marquand couldn't.
Yeah,
I keep going back to this book that I read, and there are a lot of sections where they're debating how they want to portray certain things. Like, what should Darth Vader look like when they take the mask off? And Marquand's like, we should get Laurence Olivier or some big recognizable star. And George Lucas is like, no, you should just get someone that looks like a guy, like a nice guy. And then Marquand is like, You're absolutely right, George. How dare I be incorrect?
Yeah.
And there's like 10 exchanges like this where Marquand has an idea and George is like, no, let's do this. And Marquand's like, you're right, George. I'm sorry I said anything to the contrary. And yes, I think this is totally George's film.
Because he's a small-time director getting this big break. Like, he's not going to say, no, George Lucas, god of science fiction, you are wrong. Like... Yeah. No, I don't mean to cast blame on him, but, it's... that's just who Georgie is at this point. And it's bizarre because he says in a lot of interviews that he sought out a different director for 5 and 6, not just because he thinks he is a bad director or lacking director, but because he doesn't want the work to be as overwhelming on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he will say that not directing them did nothing to help his health or his workload on it, because he's still there every day. And I think it's more evident still in the writing, because I can at least tell, like Zach said, Marquand is making visual choices, and I don't think he's less visually interesting than George, but for whatever reason, I think I prefer George's direction more, even though I know George is a relatively, like, did we get it? Okay, cool. There's just, the way Marquand moves the camera just felt a little too different to Empire, yet not dynamic or specific to me. I really can't explain why. I think it's a purely subjective thing, but something about Marquand's direction just wasn't totally for me. Writing... It's just clear that Lucas is done with Kasdan and then his pushing here. I mean, Kasdan did a marvelous job on Raiders and on Empire, but I really think George is just sucked all of that out of it as much as he can. I think we get a handful of jokes we could probably chalk up to Kasdan, like Han has some nice one-liners early on. Those are probably his work, but it's George. It's George through and through, for better or for worse, and I like it, but I can acknowledge that it probably could have been better. So we've sufficiently toasted George, or have we? Because there are 2 editions, well, or more than 2. There's quite a few different special editions, but the simplified version of discourse would be, there is the theatrical version of this film, which is only legally available on VHS from 90-something, and the continually re-updated special edition, which is viewable in glorious 4K, Ultra HD, whatchamacallit, with some regrettable computer-generated decisions, among others. I understand you 2 watched 2 different versions and may have seen the other version at differing times in your life. I've seen both. I meant to watch both for this rewatch. I only had time to rewatch the special, but I've seen the theatrical many times, including in recent memory. So I'll be able to discuss both. But I wanted to ask you your respective opinions about the changes here. Some of the most notable being CGI-heavy Jedi rocks instead of Lopty neck, some additional Boba Fett cutaways in Jabba's palace, changed celebration song at the end instead of Yub Nub, and some cuts to other planets across the galaxy with people celebrating. And Hayden Christensen giving you some spicy eyeballs. So, what do we make of these?
So when we talked about these, when we talked about A New Hope, I expressed my opinion that I think that the special edition changes are pretty bad across the board, and are really more of a special feature than the movie and the only version of the movie that you should hope to see. Why are you asking for the original in its own right? I think maybe the worst of them, the worst of the special edition changes is Jedi Rocks. It's so... I really try to avoid using the word stupid as a criticism of something.
Here we go.
But it is so genuinely, irritatingly stupid, and it just indicates to me, it's an indication of a man, I think, totally losing track of whatever was originally good about his franchise, that he created these things that were good about this series, and then thought, no, it should be a musical number, and you should see the guy's tonsils. Like, I don't, because that original musical number, it has some weak puppetry in it. I will give it that. The singer creature with the little, like, fluted mouth that like
Her name is Cy Snoodles.
Cy
Zach. My
Snoodles.
goodness.
There we go. Cy Snoodles is a pretty weak puppet. I will give it that. But the number itself and the song itself does feel like the kind of thing you would hear in like a sleazy gangster's hangout. Like it fits the scene. It builds the tone. It feels appropriate, and even kind of like as a viewer, you sort of feel like, oh, this is pretty scuzzy. I don't know if these characters are going to be all right in this location. And Jedi Rocks like totally takes away from the creepiness of the location and make all the threat that was in that location, it sucks right out of it, and you immediately aren't taking Jabba seriously anymore. The scene directly before you should be taking him most seriously, probably. So on that count, very bad choice, I think. The rest of the stuff, I think, is more or less irrelevant. Like, I don't really feel that there's a need for additional Boba Fett cutaways or for the Ewoks to blink or really anything else. I don't think there's a need to see all these other planets at the end. I really don't think there's a need to change the music at the very end. I think Yub Nub, I always thought it was a lug nut, but Yub Nub, I think, is a much better celebratory song than whatever Space Kenny G plays in the special edition. I don't know. These changes do baffle me, and I realized during this rewatch, I think one of the reasons they irritate me so much is that a lot of them are George Lucas smoothing over the personal touches and the rough edges on his film. Films, I don't think, are meant to be perfect, and I think there's a real push nowadays for everything in a movie to be perfect. But a film, I don't think, is all that separated from a play or from theater or from any other form of a presentation of a story. Sometimes things in theater and drama are imperfect, but the viewer is willing to suspend their disbelief and push through in order to enjoy the story. And that's where I think a lot of the personal touches come from. Maybe Rob G. Puffinstuff didn't quite put the puppet together properly, but that's his puppet. That's Rob's puppet. And that's his touch on the movie. And when you go back and paint Jedi Rocks over that kind of thing, it makes the movie feel so much less personal and like it makes it feel like a much colder product, at least to me.
Buy the Max Rebo merch. Do it.
Yes.
Yep. I completely agree.
Max Rebo.
Zach. If you're just gonna go back and improve the effects, and let's just say like the special effects are better, it's probably not worth it unless something was like severely messed up, or like even with like the lightsabers, if they just look like white sticks or something, it's not gonna like take away from the value of the product that was being made at the time. Like it's really not. If it's just a quality of life improvement, it's probably not worth going back to just re-release the entire movie in that way. You can have restorations and remasters and things like that, but then adding stuff, especially adding CGI to a movie that actually does practical effects pretty well, in my opinion, and the ATST is like awesome. I love the ATST, both of them, and then just like the progression of the Ewoks figuring out how to destroy them and everything, like that. All that is really fun, and the Rancor, obviously, just everything from the time period just seems to be doing what was meant to be accomplished better than the CGI. And it's kind of sad to say that, but like that's kind of the reason why I think Return of the Jedi does the special edition the worst, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, pretty much what Zach said. It's not really, besides that scene in Jabba's palace, it's not terrible. Like, it's not hugely offensive or anything. And I think you can pretty much get through the movie, especially if you're like born and raised watching this version or not watching the original. You didn't watch the original theatrical cut first. I think makes a big difference on your viewing experience. But yeah, I would just, it's pretty obvious, I think, to most people that it's not really, doesn't really need to exist, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. I just remembered another unsavory aspect of the special edition. Right before Vader picks
Yeah,
up
the no.
Palpatine, he goes,
No.
"No!"
We never would have known what he was thinking if he wasn't saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did they think they were answering for us? That wasn't already... Anyway. Well, yes, I agree, but I still think it's a lot more pleasurable a viewing experience to watch this in 4K than to watch the theatrical version on a 4:3 aspect ratio VHS. I'm sorry.
Which is a shame, I think. I think it's a shame
Yes.
it's been reduced to that.
I
Give me
feel
my
like it's a
4K
matter of time they
VHS
just
right
put them
now.
out. Like a couple months after George Lucas bites the dust, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a lot more to add. I will just say I don't think Lopty Neck is particularly great either. It's definitely better than Jedi Rocks.
Yeah, I mean,
but,
it's not really a song. It's just kind of like a thing that's on in the background. Like, that scene really isn't a musical number in the original, and then they made it into one, which has forced us to have this conversation where we pretend that Lopty Neck was
It's all
meant
part
to
of the
be like a
plan.
big deal.
George knew.
But
He knew we'd have this podcast.
I like Jedi Rocks like a little bit for the wrong reason because I can go, haha, George. But then the Yazam, I'm ashamed that I know the name of the alien. Gets up in there and then he opens his mouth and it's not even like well rendered.
No.
It's just like a pinkish sludge that covers the whole frame.
it looks
And
like
it's
Shrek.
like, why?
It really does.
It does. It's tragic. I mean, as far as the other stuff goes, though, I can't really notice the difference between the Ewoks blinking and not unless I look closely for it. I suppose I prefer them to blink. I think that's a little less scary than just the ketamine stare. But and I understand conceptually why George wanted to put Hayden in there. I guess the idea behind that would be that was the last time Anakin was a Jedi. Mm-hmm. But Mark Hamill's reaction makes no sense when he looks like that.
Who's that?
It makes no
What?
sense. Yes, it's there's a Lego parody that did that joke to great effect. Anyway, I'll say what I said the last couple times. Watch the theatrical first, and then you can watch the 4K special edition every time.
month.
I want to address some other like new aspects. I'm always like a character-driven person, especially in these like chunky space operas where aesthetics and personal conflict tend to be the driving thing here. And there are some new things here. Jabba is new, unless you count special edition of A New Hope. Emperor is new, except for Clive Reville / special edition hologram of Ian McDiarmid, but basically new. The Ewoks are new. Nyan Numb is new. We already talked about Max Rebo and Droopy McCool and Cy Snoodles, but I don't know. What characters draw your attention? You're certainly invited to talk about Luke and Leia and the others as well, because there's plenty going on here. But
Ian McDiarmid, hard
yeah.
carry.
What did you make of the people here?
Go ahead, Zach.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do think Ian McDiarmid is kind of the standout in this. He's playing it's not quite the Emperor that's sort of like passed into pop culture as like this is what the character is. I think there is a difference between prequels Emperor and that's not Palpatine, but like prequels Emperor, meaning the end of Revenge of the Sith, and this Emperor. This Emperor has a bit of an attitude. Sometimes he's like sassy in a way that's pretty funny. There's a line where he says he's talking to Vader. And
I thought I told you to remain on
Your
the command
well,
ships.
there's a scene later where he's in his throne room and he's talking about they're talking about Luke, and then he ends the sentence and he goes, and then you will bring him before me.
Yeah.
And it's very like pouty and like sassy, and it's like, oh, okay. So I thought that was fun to notice, but he is still delivering that sort of like it's sort of like it's basically like a male witch. Basically, it's
warlock.
It's an interesting way to tackle that character, and it's a warlock. There we go. And it's I think it's an interesting extension of what we saw in either version of The Empire Strikes Back, where it's more of this shadowy figure that doesn't look the same at all in the original version of A New Hope, but it carries on that idea. Jabba is a great design and a great piece of puppetry as well. Even though I don't hate furry man Jabba from the original like cutscenes from A New Hope, but I do think this makes for more of an interesting opening to the film, and there's a lot of cool character designs that I think can come out of that. All the different creatures and puppets and everything that are in this room, even if a lot of them are very Muppet-like. I think a lot of the other characters don't really leave much of an impact. I think a lot of Star Wars fans love the designs of characters that have kind of become memes within that community. Nyan Nub being an example.
Numb, not nub. My goodness, you're hopeless.
And Admiral Akbar.
Of course. How could I forget?
Being another example. I mean, but I don't really think Akbar is like all that significant or compelling of a character. It's just that he says it's a trap. And so, therefore, Star Wars fans have something to throw up their arms and cheer about whenever they go to a screening together. And the Ewoks, I think, are a strong piece of design as well, even though I don't really think they're the best design for what they do within the confines of the story. It's pretty obvious based on the script or based on the writing that final battle is meant to recall something like the Battle of Little Bighorn, where, this much bigger, more technologically equipped army is being taken down by a force that is using tools and techniques that perhaps they're not expecting. But since they're little teddy bears, those techniques just come across like Home Alone and make the Empire look like nothing that even resembles a threat. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of new things introduced here. Most of them, I think, don't really stick out as much more than just additions to the canon, though, aside from maybe the Emperor and Jabba.
Yeah. What'd you say about the Ewoks, Zach? What's your problem? Anyway, no. Yeah, Admiral Akbar, I mean, he kind of just fills the archetype that you need for that role, like, for the space battle to be happening. And I think, I think Jabba is a pretty freaking formidable villain, honestly, for the little screen time he actually has relative to the rest of the movie. I think he leaves his mark pretty well. Like that's a whole nother like thing that happens in the beginning. And I think it's a really fantastic introduction to the continued vulnerabilities of our protagonist. There's my conclusion sentence right there.
That's your soundbite, my dude.
Yeah. I think there's not too much that's added though. I don't feel it doesn't feel like it really does feel like we're continuing on this world that's being built. It doesn't feel like we're being thrown into a large foray of Gungans and you're just waking up from a fever dream and freaking Jar Jar is right in your face and Phantom Menace and everything. So I think there's that benefit. I think there's the gradual introduction of these characters as archetypes, as supporting characters is really going to be. I think that's like one of the best things that Star Wars does. It keeps the ball rolling when it comes to believability, and a little overselling on the Ewoks from an objective, subjective standpoint. But yeah, overall, I think they're really good additions. I don't feel like there's a big thing that I've always been concerned about is downplaying Vader's impact as a villain and being like making him look more vulnerable without like detracting from how powerful or how emotionally damaged he actually is. And I feel like there's a kind of a capability with that when it comes to Kylo Ren. And kind of like how his legacy is going to be treated is kind of put into question. But I think here he doesn't. He genuinely feels like a villain that's coming to his senses. That's finally like coming around, and I feel like there's just enough. It's like a fast enough turnaround time where it doesn't feel unnatural, but it really fits like the confines of the story. And it doesn't feel dragged out. It feels very like punchy and impactful when besides the no dialogue, which was unnecessary. I think him kind of looking and just the way like that kind of comes into the direction aspect of it there. But just seeing Luke suffer and it's not oversold or anything, I think that whole scene is really great for Vader's development. And Ian McDiarmid obviously accentuates that tenfold. So
Yeah. I hate to keep harping on this no edition, but right when that happened, my dad had sat down and was watching some of it with me, and my mom was in the adjacent room and was watching this scene, because who could not watch the most compelling moment where Vader turns, you just got the sense that they were just drawn to the screen, and then Vader says no, and they're both like, I don't remember him
not
saying
in my
that
movie.
and I'm like, you're right, he didn't. Yeah, I love Ian McDiarmid so much. I was going to say I'm a fan of the political intrigue in the prequels, unlike many. I was going to say that I prefer that, but I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that because he's so freaking compelling here, and you have to make ways for him to be threatening without detracting from this old manishness of him. And I remember when I was a little kid, and all you really care about is the exciting parts. Especially, this must have been especially after watching the prequels. I remember thinking the Emperor should have had a lightsaber duel with them. That would have been cooler. But now I can confidently say that the lightning is a terrific effect, both in terms of how they realize it on screen and the way he freaking performs it. He's just and he grits his teeth and he just nods forward and he takes appropriate dramatic pauses. It's just so compelling. It's so good. Jabba is a fantastic puppet. I was looking at it and it holds up in 4K more than ever. It's so tactile and alive. Every little piece of it, and it changes from scene to scene, and not in a lack of continuity way, but in a progression sense. There's added slime and grossness, the cut after he steals Leia, and and it's great. I mean, it just adds to the repulsiveness of all of it. I love his laughing court jester, Salacious B. Crumb. I love all of the you might need to censor the second word in this, but there's a Reddit text post that mocks Star Wars fans, where they go, Star Wars fans be like, OMG, Glupshido is in this, crying emojis. And there is no shortage of Glupshidos in this film. Max Rebo, Nyanum, Droopy McCool, Salacious B. Crumb, Sice Noodles. It's just fantastic.
The list never ends.
I could even name 5 Ewoks offhand if I wanted to.
Warwick.
Paplu, Chief Chirpa, if you will. Anyway.
Wicket?
Yes, of
you
course.
didn't name Wicket
Of course,
first?
we can't forget. Well, Wicket's last name is Warwick, so I accept it.
Of course,
anyway.
Course you were gonna say this.
Get it together.
All this to say, I really like this more because it's a Star Wars film, because it's that great of a film.
You don't understand the cultural nuances.
Yeah, his full name, Zach. His full name is Wicket W. Warwick.
Why do the alien teddy bears
They're
have
not
surnames? Are they filling out
aliens.
tax paperwork?
He has a middle initial too, Zach.
Are
Don't
they
forget that.
applying for loans?
Zach, on
Do they go
Endor,
to Ewok Bank
on
and
Endor,
apply
we
for
are
a
the
loan?
aliens. You have to respect their culture. Ugh.
Yeah! You take that, you insensitive imperialist Brit. Get out of here.
Respect the gold robot man. Pay your teeths, or he'll float above you.
I do believe I am at the end of my rope here, but I'd love to hear some final thoughts. I'm sure 20 minutes from now I'm going to be like, oh, I forgot to mention that Max Rebo plays the organ with his feet. But I can only keep this going on for so long. So final thoughts from both of you.
Well, I'm sure your kids will have fun with it if you're an adult who likes Star Wars. I know that I did when I was a kid growing up on Star Wars, and my parents had the VHS of the last time releases of the original trilogy. I love those, and I liked this one a lot. I didn't ever find the Ewoks all that cute. It was just kind of a matter-of-fact thing of, oh, and the Ewoks are in this movie, and they knock over stormtroopers with rocks. Okay. And I found that very cool. Although I think I probably liked the first one more. Either way, I'm sure your kids will like it. It's probably the most kid-friendly of those first 3 Star Wars movies, even if it is narratively and filmically probably the weakest. But I don't want to sleep on Richard Marquand. I like his camera movement, especially during that duel between Luke and Vader. There's this one camera movement where they're kind of on that under technicians area, and it trucks along with them as they're dueling, and then go up into the open area. That's a really great camera movement. That's like one of the best shots in the original.
You probably think that movement is cuter than any of the freaking Ewoks act.
Yes, I do. I would swipe right on that movement.
Well, too bad it's moving left. Anyway, Return of the Jedi. I'm glad he returned. And it's a really great wrap-up to the trilogy, considering all of the problems we may have been suffering with. Who cares, man? Your sister... It's whatever, It's just how it works out. It's just how it happens sometimes. Love is different way. This is like you said for kids. You have to teach them the differences of love. And Harrison Ford figured it out that day.
This is how we got those Cloverfield Lane viewers. So keep it rolling.
He figured it out in the forest that day what love really meant, and he knew it wasn't for her brothers. And that's all that matters. Okay. Return of the Jedi is definitely, I'm original trilogy fanatic, and there's really not a lot that can disappoint you, except the special edition. Everything else is basically lovable to some capacity, and I really don't think, I mean, I don't know. There really was so much setup, and there was so much kind of thought through when it came to the hero's journey, and I think there's enough of a world built at that point that it would have only been better to add on to it with George Lucas's vision, and I really don't think there would have been any problem with how he finished it as long as he kept those plot points tied well, and I think he did. And I just, everything that you would want to expect in a Star Wars movie after those first two films is there, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Good thing they stopped right there, and we stopped at episode 6, and everything was wrapped up great. We saw free from the mouse.
Okay. I was listening to that David Bowie song, Life on Mars. It's on America's Tortured Brow. Mickey Mouse is growing up a cow. And I'm like, wow, that line really aged well. I could totally see why Harrison Ford wanted them to kill Han in this, because there's just so many moments in this where he's made a complete fool. Like when Leia's like, oh, he's my brother. And he's just like, huh? Anyway, I like this film a lot. I adore Star Wars. And I think more of my issues with it are almost in a sort of bizarrely secondhand me trying to defend the other installments of Star Wars by highlighting the flaws in this one. And I really do think the writing is so whatever it wants to be in this one, that they got away with a lot more in this than they ever could again in the prequels or the sequels. I do strongly think that. I think anyway, the whole Luke and Leia thing, it's totally just part of the canon now, and we all just accept it without a thought, but it is totally out of nowhere. And, I don't know. I like Star Wars, and I wasn't really gonna, I wasn't really hard set on doing Return, but, I'm glad we did. This was fun. 4 out of 5, and, it's probably meaner to say 4 out of 5, but you didn't really deserve it, than it is to say 3 or 3.5, but I really, really liked it. But that's what I'm saying. So I love you, George. Don't ever stop film. Oh wait, he already did. Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, I guess we review the week in Week in Review. Is that right?
Yeah.
Hype.
Well, I have a just before we recorded viewing, which seems to be happening pretty frequently nowadays. I watched Jacques Tati's Jour de Fête. I don't speak French, so I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but it roughly translates, I'm told, to The Big Day. I have not watched a ton of Tati, but it's not hard to pick up his stuff because he only made like 6 movies. And totally off chance, I happened to watch his debut. I shuffled my Letterboxd watch list, and this is the one that it gave to me. And this movie is just about a small town that's preparing for like a summer festival, and the mailman, played by Tati himself, has to deal with all kinds of shenanigans about town. He's sort of a Chaplin-esque character. He gets into slapstick difficulties. It's a fine enough little film. It's not really the kind of thing that I was expecting. Tati has this big reputation as a great comedic filmmaker, which I suspect probably comes more from his latter works. It's strange to say that a director with only 6 movies can have latter works, but I have a feeling that stuff like Traffic probably has more to do with his reputation than this movie, because this is fine. It has some nice slapstick. He gives a nice comedic performance, but it's really not anything all that substantial. The last 20 minutes or so, where he's trying to do a really fast delivery of the mail because he's jealous of American postal workers, is probably the funniest bit. There's all kind of gags of him like holding on to the back of a truck on his bicycle so he can go faster and that kind of thing. So lots of fun bits during the last half, but mostly it's just kind of a slice of life movie about this French countryside with some occasional gags thrown in here and there. 3 out of 5. I enjoyed it, but I don't know if I'd recommend it really.
I'll go. Prey. I saw Prey.
Yes,
and,
yeah.
Trachtenberg, he was there directing it and stuff. It really did great callbacks to Predator. I think it was a really good film. I think, based on what I've been reading from other people, I'm not as huge on it. I wouldn't say it deserved a theatrical release. Hot take, probably not. Strictly really from an acting and from an effects standpoint, they just really don't hold their muster. I can kind of see why you wouldn't want to release that in theaters. I know it was kind of a contractual obligation. Is kind of what led to this being on streaming for Hulu, but otherwise, like besides that, the Midthunder's great. I think she's a great protagonist. She's instant appeal as a badass, and I really like the Predator design, and the homages are either very explicit or very subtle to the first or second, or really other Predators, mostly the first and second though. And I really enjoy the setting. I think it's definitely worth seeing if you enjoyed the first Predator at all, because it really is trying to ultimately pay homage to the first one. The action is a little bit too much shaky cam probably, but for the most part, it's really engaging. Super gory, doesn't really hold itself back at all. Some of the best action we've seen from any Predator ever. Extremely well choreographed. And I mean, it's a little bit on the shorter side, but ultimately I think it's worth watching for anyone who's a fan. The story and dialogue, I mean, it's definitely serviceable, but it's very predictable ultimately, but and just everything else makes up for it so much, especially what we've kind of been getting and fatiguing literally every Predator fan ever up to this point. I think it does justice. I would not be disappointed if they made a sequel. I think it would. I would be willing to see a sequel, especially if Midthunder's in it. But I think it's really great. I gave it 3.5 out of 5. But the acting doesn't really hold up for me too much. But the Comanche Nation stuff I think works really well. It's really well integrated, and it totally works in the universe, and it does not feel like a cash grab. I'm happy to say.
Nice, very nice. I kind of want to rip Tom Holland a new one, but I think I'll save that for our next one because I don't know if I'll have time to watch another new thing. I'll be happy now. I'll preserve the childlike joy that Georgie would want me to feel. I rewatched A Hard Day's Night somewhat recently, and let me tell you, I liked it a lot more than I remembered liking it. I think the first time I watched it was when I was sort of first going through my Beatlemania phase, so I'm really not sure, but it may have been as early as sophomore year of high school. And at that point, I think I watched it and was like, oh, maybe old movies don't always suck, because this one was fine. But on this rewatch, I had gained the intellectual capacity, Galaxy Brain, to understand the hilarity of repeatedly referring to Paul's granddad as clean, as very clean. It's so freaking funny, and I don't know why, but it's so funny. And each of the Beatles are pretty nice at like handling their own little screen personas, especially Ringo. I think Ringo is really the star of this one because he kind of runs away and he plays the role of the maligned of the four of them. Mm-hmm. And I was worried sometimes that John was pushing his weirdness a little too far, but he reels it in often enough to still feel like a real person. And you know, it's all the interview sections when they're asking Paul all these questions and Paul answers all of them the same way. No, actually, we're just good friends. And hearing some of the songs in a different key. I was trying to figure out why they did that. And it must have been that they filmed them performing it at a certain tempo, and then they had to slow down the music to match the tempo of the footage. That's what makes the most sense to me. I have no idea if that's true, but it's really neat hearing And I Love Her and If I Fell and a few others in a different key. It's a different sonic experience than just listening to the album another time over. So kind of a treat for a big fan, I'd say. And it's just super fun. Like, not only is it funny and lively and exciting, it's just very, very fun and very well directed. And Richard Lester captures a lot of small little moments in these clubs and what have you. And it totally captures the effervescent joy and chaos of Beatlemania. I'd highly recommend it. I had it at a 4 and it upped its way to a 4.5 on this rewatch. I watched the Criterion 4K release and it looks splendid.
Mm-hmm. Only the second movie that my girlfriend and I have both enjoyed. After Finding Nemo. Which I asked for on Letterboxd, by the way.
It sounds like you should just choose all of the movies I like, Zach.
I guess so. It's starting to feel like it. Yeah.
Yep.
Marvelous Cinematography. Okay. Well, I'm afraid that last time I told a bit of a porky pie. Now, I said that the next film I'd be talking about was Spider-Man Homecoming. Because Spider-Man Homecoming is the next movie in the MCU. But because I am still technically suffering from said mysterious disease that I was suffering from last time, and because Spider-Man Homecoming isn't on Disney Plus, I couldn't go to the library to get it. So I had to watch the next movie in the MCU, which was Thor Ragnarok. And this one is fine. I think I have surprisingly little to say about it, actually. It's certainly better than Love and Thunder. Watching Ragnarok again, I was struck by just how much bigger of a movie it feels like than Love and Thunder, which is weird because I think the scale is actually, in a lot of ways, a lot smaller most of the time than it is in Love and Thunder, where the threat is that every god in the universe will be destroyed. And I also think it's a funnier movie. Jeff Goldblum is hilarious in it, even though he maybe only has like 3 or 4 scenes where he's the focus. But he's sort of like mild-mannered but very excited about everything. Oh yes. Sort of ruling figure on this planet is just hilarious. And theorizing how he got to be in charge in the first place is also very funny. And I think there's a lot of interesting chemistry that comes out of Thor's interactions with Banner in this film as well, and with his interactions with Hulk. I think that perhaps Taika Waititi's sense of humor has been a little bit overhyped within recent years in the film community. I'm very worried that he's going to get Lin-Manuel Miranda'd. Meaning that he's going to be so wildly overexposed that everyone's just going to be sick of him and he's going to be banished to doing basically nothing in a very uncool corner of the room for the rest of his career, despite the fact that he might not really deserve that. But I think here it more or less works. So 3 out of 5. It's a very middling Marvel movie, which surprises me because I enjoyed it quite a bit when it first came out. But overall, just sort of on the scale so far. And next time I promise, be actually talking about Spider-Man Homecoming.
Alrighty. Let's
run
do
down.
yet another trench run, but it's like a trench run, but it's not a trench run. That was a reference
Bobcat
to a
Gold?
YouTube.
Wait, where did you
Anyway.
come from?
There's this YouTuber that does a very funny bit about Marvel villains. Anyway, I was trying to make a joke about how we're doing another trench run, but it's different, even though it's another Death Star, but it's different anyway. This time Lando and Nyan are flying. I don't know. Can we just do this? Zach, will you start us off?
Sure.
Mitchell, are you ready?
Yep.
Alrighty. 3, 2, 1, go.
A burping frog thing that really seems like it should be from the special editions, but isn't.
3 out of 5.
Max Rebo.
4 out of 5.
Jedi mind trick.
4 out of 5.
Droopy McCool.
3 out of 5.
The Sarlacc pit.
3 out of 5.
Cy Snoodles.
3 out of 5.
Salacious B. Crumb's laugh.
4 out of 5.
Jedi Rocks.
3 out of 5.
Lapti neck.
3 out of 5.
Ian McDermott as the Emperor.
5 out of 5.
Jabba the Hutt.
4 out of 5.
Luke and Leia as siblings.
3 out of 5.
Boba Fett failing to live up to his potential.
2 out of 5.
Warwick Davis as Wicket W. Warwick.
4 out of 5.
Ewoks.
5 out of 5.
Flying Casual.
3 out of 5.
The Emperor's office chair.
4 out of 5.
Admiral Akbar.
3 out of 5.
Darth Vader's censored eyebrows.
3 out of 5.
1 second, 9 num! Time up! Woo! We've got a few left over. Excellent.
That's crazy.
Play us away, John Williams. What's next?
Okay, well, I guess I can preview our next episode. Next time I will be hosting for the last time this season. And ladies and gents, we're going off on what I think will be a big one. This film certainly had a big impact on me the first time that I watched it. And I watched it with my father, which may have been a mistake for both of us. Yep, we're watching Bone Tomahawk. So if anybody's watching along with us at home, grab your parents, grab your date, grab your grandparents, and give Bone Tomahawk a watch before next time, boys and girls. Get ready to be surprised.
Yeah.
You don't have to kill people. It's not nice. Well, this has been yet another space opera here. Another George apology episode. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
And I'm not sorry.
Bye-bye.